Okay, you asked for it, so here is my entire spice collection. I'm just gonna go through all of my spices and geek out over them, if you don't mind. The first I did go over in a previous video, just some general tips for saving money on spices and like if you're new to using spices, some things to keep in mind. So if you haven't seen that, you can check that out if you're new to spices. But if you're like me and you like spices and you just want to geek out over spices, hey, you've come to the right place because this is probably going to be a very long video. Anyway, let's get started. So first I want to show you my little implements that I use when using spices. This is a mortar and pestle. This is a coffee grinder slash spice grinder. I only use it for spices because I don't drink coffee. So spices are better if you buy them whole, and I am over time going to gradually replace a lot of these with the whole versions of themselves because it is better. It's generally cheaper, they're more potent, and they taste better, and they also kind of last longer. So it's a little more effort to grind them yourself, and you have to pay for these things up front, but once you've made these investments, you're going to save money in the long run, and your spices are going to taste so much better. So I get my spices for pretty cheap. That's another thing about spices. If you can buy them in bulk, of course you're going to save money. So this is kind of a big investment that I've got going on here for delicious recipes. With that in mind, let's get started alphabetically. So first, these are achiote seeds or annatto seeds. These are like often used for color in dishes. I've only used these to make puerco pibil twice, and that's it. And that's why I only have a little bit left. And I don't know what else I would use these in. Maybe I'll look up something. I don't know, like I recall they sort of tasted like that weird off taste that canned food has that I don't really like. So I'm not actually a big fan of these. Maybe that's why I haven't used them. But at some point I'll probably make puerco pibil again because that was delicious, and I'll use these. Whole allspice and ground allspice. As I mentioned before, I do have whole versions of spices and also some pre-ground versions of spices. Allspice is probably one of those things I want to start investing in just the whole version of it. Now you may notice a lot of these spices I'm going to have in these mason jars because I buy them in bulk and then I store them in the jars. But some of my spices I still have in these little tiny, like, McCormick or Spice Island things that you would get at a mainstream grocery store. I probably bought these a long time ago, or I was caught short and I needed allspice and I didn't want to drive all the way out to Winco to get it, and I was already at Safeway, so I got these there. That's probably why I got this instead of in bulk. But yeah, allspice is great. It tastes like allspice is. It's often used with other warming spices like ginger, cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, and it kind of if you don't have any of those other spices but you have allspice, you can kind of get away with just using allspice. But you can also use this in savory cooking. It's in a lot of Jamaican cuisine. Amchur powder. This, I'm so glad that I discovered it. Indians discovered it. Actually, I don't know who originated amchur powder. It's basically dried mango that has been pureed. And it smells, so it smells kind of like, if you didn't tell me what this is, I would say it smells like raisins. And it kind of tastes like raisins. It's very, very tangy. Sip of tea. And my husband insisted that we got this because it was in a recipe for samosas that he wanted to try. And I was like, let's just do without it. I don't want to bother getting this weird spice I've never heard of. And he's like, no, we're gonna get all the spices and make it exactly as the recipe says. And I'm really glad that I caved because of that. That's how we discovered our semi-local Indian store where I get a lot of these spices. And yeah, this is very special, and it's used in a lot of northern Indian cuisine, I believe. And yeah, it's very, very tangy and very flavorful. I'm not out of the A's yet. This is going to take forever. Star anise. This is another really good warming spice, and it also is one of the spices in Chinese five spice. So you'll find this in Western cuisine contexts in mulled apple cider and such. And it smells and tastes like black licorice. So if black licorice is not your thing, but you want it to become your thing, if you want to broaden your horizons, star anise is kind of a good gateway to that because it's mild black licorice. And if you combine it with other things, it's great. I also use this in a lot of Indian cuisine. We're on to the B's. Bay leaves. You can't really see them very well because they're in a plastic bag. Eventually I want to keep all my spices in jars, but I don't have enough jars at the moment. But most of you are probably familiar with bay laurels. And if you've been by a bay tree before, they smell wonderful. Yeah, it's a nice woody sort of aroma, and you'll find them in a lot of stews and soups, spaghetti sauce, and in almost all Indian dishes as well. Caraway seed. This is very, very old. I don't even remember when I got this. I probably got it to make Irish soda bread or something. And I like it okay, like in the context of Irish soda bread or rye bread. It's basically that twangy taste that you get whenever you have pumpernickel. Actually, I don't know if it's in pumpernickel or not, but like rye bread or Irish soda bread often will have caraway seed in it. My husband does not like this, and that's partly why I just have not been using it at all. Anytime I make a bread thing, like I want him to help me eat it. I don't want to have to eat it all by myself. So I don't know, I might use the rest of this at some point. Cardamom. So this is part 1 in a series. Cardamom is probably mine and my husband's favorite spice of all time. It's similar to allspice in that it kind of tastes like a combination of many different spices. You can use it in sweet and savory applications, just like allspice, but I'd say it's even more versatile than allspice that way. And it has a black pepper note to it as well as sort of that warming spice hit. So this is ground cardamom, ground green cardamom, by the way. And then this is green cardamom whole in the pods and green cardamom seeds. So these seeds come from these pods, and then that powdered stuff is these pods pureed. These pods pureed. Good band name. Anyway, I buy them in whole pods like this to put in my chai tea blend. Oh, I was going to put my chai tea blend out here too. Oh well, too late. I'm not getting out. It was really hard getting back here, so I'm not going to get out and get my chai blend. But yeah, I make my own chai blend for tea, and well, chai is tea, but you know, I put these whole green cardamom pods in my chai blend that I make from scratch. It's crystallized ginger, green cardamom, cloves, black peppercorns, cinnamon stick, and I think that's all. I might be forgetting something. But yeah, these are mostly for tea only. Although I sometimes put them in Indian biryanis, like my egg biryani. I think I have a recipe floating next to my head for that. Yeah, I put that in there as well. And then these cardamom seeds are super special. They're just the seed part that's inside of the pod, so they're the most flavorful. And I use these pretty much exclusively in when I make jam. I discovered that strawberry cardamom jam is the most delicious jam in the world, and I want to try it with other fruits this summer. I can already smell it, like I haven't even... it smells so good. So yeah, if you're not familiar with green cardamom, change that. It's a very expensive spice, actually. So if you're kind of watching your budget, maybe don't try it just yet. But yeah, it's just so complex. It's like a little bit lemony and zingy and peppery, and it's kind of like warming spices, kind of clovey, kind of allspicey. It's just really good. And on to black cardamom, the grand finale. So black cardamom, I saw this in the Indian market and I was just intrigued because I love green cardamom, and I thought, well, maybe I'll love black cardamom. Oh, and it is so different from green cardamom. I don't know how well you can see this, but it's like these giant, woody, spongy, brown pods, and they're very lightweight, by the way. They would float in water. These don't strike me as being as good in sweet applications as green cardamom, but I don't know. I haven't tried it yet. Basically, I reverse engineered a recipe from Grandpa Kitchen, one of my favorite YouTube channels, by the way. They are a group of people in, I think, southern India, and they make these giant like batches of food and feed the hungry with it. And so I saw them making a recipe once for coconut rice, I believe, and they just said spices, and they had like a handful of spices in there, but they didn't have like a detailed description of what all the spices were, but it looked like some of them were black cardamom pods. So I gave it a try, and I really like it. It's sort of star anise-y, black licorice-y, just sort of. It's like in that similar sort of family, and it's like a little musky as well. Oh, it's so weird. But yeah, I like it, and I want to explore this more. Celery seed and celery salt. So celery seed, I don't know why I have this. It might have been from my husband's spice cabinet from before we moved in together. So this might be more than 5 years old or something. And I honestly don't know what I would use this celery seed for. So I'm going to put it down. Celery salt, however, I do believe that is celery seed ground up and mixed with salt. So this is actually really nice kind of as a finishing salt, and I'll often put it in like salad dressings, especially for like a macaroni salad, a potato salad, a coleslaw. And yeah, it kind of tastes like celery. Celery is an herb, by the way. So yeah, it's kind of like celery, and it's salty, obviously. And this is also a finishing salt that is put on the famous Chicago dog. I used to be one of those boring people who like would only have ketchup on my hot dog and nothing else, but like I tried a Chicago dog once and I was converted for life, so I also use it for those. But I had one of these and my husband had one of these before we moved in together, so now we have like 2 of these, so it's gonna take a while to get rid of it. Cayenne pepper. So this is a generic cayenne pepper. I got it in the bulk section at Winco. It's a really nice clean heat. It doesn't really taste like much of anything, at least not to me. Back before I had a higher spice tolerance, all the hot chilies tasted exactly the same to me. They just all tasted like fire. But cayenne has a very clean heat to it, and I mostly use this, like I'll blend it with other spices when I make Indian dishes, but I will also use it to make the sauce for hot chicken. And it's great. If you are trying to watch your salt intake also, like your doctor said you shouldn't eat very much salt, sprinkling cayenne on your food is kind of a good little trick to use less salt, because you won't notice that it's not salty enough if there's heat on there. And then this is an Indian cayenne pepper. It has so much more flavor. Like that last one doesn't really have much flavor. This one has a flavor. It's a little softer, a little sweeter. This particular cayenne, Indian cayenne pepper, it doesn't really say anything else beyond like cayenne Indian, but I got this at a very fancy spice store in Seattle. It's like, that's one of those places, like if I were rich, I would go there all the time and buy all their spices, because they have so many amazing unique spices there and special ones. So because this is a special spice, I haven't used very much of it. It's one of those dilemmas where like you have something that's so special that you save it for a special occasion and then you never use it and then it goes to waste. So I need to use this more. Now I'm going to take a sip of tea. Chili powders. Eventually I want to have just like all the chilies. Like I said, before I wasn't really able to differentiate between the flavors of all of the chilies, but now that I can, like I'm really excited about exploring all of them. This is just your generic like Mexican in air quotes chili powder, just a very all-purpose. It's darker, it's sweeter, and it's milder. And I use this whenever I make like chilies, any kind of Tex-Mex food like white people tacos or a chili or anything like that. Whereas this chili, on the other hand, this Indian chili, it's so much hotter, not so sweet as that other chili powder. And I use this when I make Indian food, basically. I mistakenly used this once to make enchilada sauce. Like my enchilada sauce recipe, like I put something like 1/4 or 1/2 cup of chili powder in it. It's a lot. And I used this thinking, yeah, chili powder's all the same. And oh, it was so hot. It was delicious, but it was very, very hot. So yeah, hot Indian chili. Whole chilies. And I'm realizing now as I'm sitting here that I forgot to take out my bag of Indian whole chilies as well, but I'm not going to get up because it's really hard to get up and out of this situation. So pretend that I have a bag of Indian chilies as well. This video isn't long enough already. Anyway, these are just, again, you're more like just generic chilies. It didn't really say what kind of chili they were in the bag. But yeah, these are just good all-purpose chilies. I sometimes use these like even in Chinese garlic chili sauce. Like I'll soak these and I'll cook them and then I'll combine them with garlic and I'll puree them, and it makes a really delicious sauce for like stir fries with eggplant and tofu. And then these are guajillo chilies, and I use these in marinades for, well, al pastor tacos, which I'm actually going to make in a few days. So I'm probably going to use all these up by then and I'll need to restock. But these are not very spicy. They're very sweet and like, I almost said earthy. I don't know really if earthy is the right word. Let me smell them. Ah, yeah, they're so sweet. They kind of smell like the amchur powder a little bit. They kind of smell raisiny. Might not sound very appealing to be like, this is like a raisin. But yeah, it kind of does have that raisiny quality to it, and it's great in marinades. Cinnamon powders. So this is just your generic mainstream cinnamon powder. This is a relic from my husband's bachelor days, and in spite of it being several years old, it still has plenty of flavor. You might have heard like, oh, you shouldn't keep your spices longer than X number of months or X number of years. Spices don't really go bad generally. They just lose their potency, so you might have to use more than what the recipe calls for. Or they might get bug infested or something, in which case you should throw them out. But usually spices like last forever, more or less. But yeah, the cinnamon is very old, but still very tasty. And maybe we'll finish it in a year or 2. It's just good in everything, really. Any baked good if you want to just give it that nice warming spice touch. But I also like it a lot in cocoa. And this is another special spice from that store in Seattle. And I actually am almost out of it because it is that good, even though it's so special and so expensive and like I wanted to use it sparingly. It is so delicious. This is a special Vietnamese cinnamon, and oh, it's so hard to explain how it's different. Oh, but it's just different. It's almost just like it tastes more like cinnamon. I don't know. You know how like when you get a really good peach in the summer and it just tastes more like peach and you can't really describe why it tastes better than supermarket peaches, but it just does and it just tastes like a peach? Yeah, it smells sweeter. And a little more, yeah, just really clean cinnamon. And I like putting this in my cocoa. But yeah, if I'm gonna do something that's like cinnamon forward and like cinnamon is the only spice, I will splurge and use this one just because it tastes so much more distinct. And also cinnamon sticks. I have a lot more of these actually in a cupboard in a bag. But yeah, these are great, you know, for steeping really slowly in things. It's good for actually putting little whole pieces of cinnamon stick in a lot of Indian dishes as well. And then you can just fish out the cinnamon in the end, and then you don't have that like gritty cinnamon in your actual food. So yeah, cinnamon sticks. And they smell wonderful. Whole cloves and ground cloves. So these whole cloves, this container I'm recycling. This container itself is very, very old, and it used to have whole cloves that I bought at the store, but I have been since refilling it with bulk cloves that I buy at either Winco or the Indian market. So yeah, whole cloves, wonderful. They smell amazing. A little goes a long way. These are also great in mulled cider. I haven't really put them in cocoa so much, but I don't think they'd be bad in cocoa. And they're also in a lot of Indian food. I think they're in some Chinese 5 spices as well. Ooh, and cinnamon earlier, backtracking, is also in Chinese 5 spice. But it is going to be more that like Asian cinnamon, like it'll be closer to that Vietnamese cinnamon than the mainstream Western cinnamon. But yeah, clove. And then these are just ground cloves. You know, if I'm baking, I don't want to like bother grinding everything just to get like a quarter or an eighth of a teaspoon of cloves. So I do think it's worth having ground cloves. Coriander. We're still in the C's. To be fair, a lot of my spices begin with C. Anyway, coriander is a really versatile spice. It's in like, you can put it in almost anything. It's almost like the onion of spices in that it can just go in any savory dish and you're good. It's in like pretty much every Indian dish that I make. And it's also like, I noticed a lot of British chefs put coriander in a lot of stuff. Like they call cilantro, which coriander comes from that. They call cilantro like fresh coriander, but they also put this powdered coriander. So this comes from seeds. It's not pureed cilantro leaves. It doesn't even, like to me, it doesn't even smell like cilantro at all. So I think if you're one of those people those unfortunate souls who can't enjoy cilantro because it tastes like soap, I think you're fine with coriander because it doesn't really taste like it. And I can't honestly place its flavor. It's just, like I said, it's kind of like the onion of spices in that you can just put it in anything and it will improve the flavor of whatever you're cooking. Cumin. So some people say cumin, some people say cumin. I don't know which is technically correct. I think they both are. Anyway, this, when my dad and stepmom first discovered it years and years ago, so this was one of my gateway spices to like beyond salt and pepper cooking. It smells kind of like BO. There's no delicate way to put it. But very earthy, but yeah, also just kind of smells like BO. And for a while, they would cook their rice with just a little bit of cumin in it, and like the whole house would stink like BO. And I didn't actually like it that much in that context. I really like cumin blended with other spices. I think it's a little too overpowering on its own and tastes a little too much like BO if that's all you're putting in your food. But this is in pretty much every Indian dish. It's usually in the blend. And yeah, very earthy, very BO-y. Very musky, to put it more diplomatically. Curry powder. So even though I do make curries like properly, more or less, I do still like curry powder. For those of you not in the know, curry powder isn't really exactly an Indian spice. It's kind of like the West's interpretation of Indian flavors. Like a lot of the spices that are in most commercial curry powders in the West, like you will find them in Indian cuisine. But it's just a little bit different. So this usually has coriander, cumin, turmeric. That's what gives it its yellow yellow color, and fenugreek, which we'll get to later. But yeah, I love this stuff. This was like one of my first gateway spices. I think I discovered this before I discovered cumin. It will dye your clothes yellow. What's really distinctive about this is, I think, the fenugreek. There was this flavor I couldn't quite place. And fenugreek is not as commonly used in a lot of Indian cuisine as like all the other spices that are in this blend. So I think it's the fenugreek that kind of makes it stand out. There's also usually garlic powder like in this as well. Yeah, it's very bright, punch you in the face kind of smell. And because it's a blend, like you could use just this and salt and nothing else, and then you have a very flavorful dish. So when I was a beginner cook, when I was a kid, one of my favorite things to do with curry powder was to just sprinkle this and some salt and lemon juice. Lemon juice goes super well with curry powder on some chicken thighs, and I'd bake them in the oven. Sometimes if I had it, I'd put fresh cilantro and or scallions on top, and I'd serve that with some rice and some peas, and it was delicious. Nowadays, I don't really do that so much anymore, but I do use this curry powder for a few things. I don't use it really for Indian food, but I use it when I make Thai pineapple fried rice. That's one of the main flavor components in that. And there's this other vegan dish that I like making in the wintertime. I do have a recipe for that floating next to my face somewhere. It's a roasted curried cauliflower, carrot, sweet potato, and chickpea with some olive oil and curry powder, and it's really tasty. So I think this curry powder thrives with roasting in the oven, but it's also great like in soups and stews and anything. Curry leaves. So I bought these fresh and then I dried them because I can never use them quickly enough before they go bad. Curry leaves, oh my. So this is another new spice that my husband and I discovered a couple years ago. And it smells like old car. There's really no diplomatic way to put it. It's wonderful old car. When they're fresh, they kind of remind me a little more of like a mix between old car and mint. Like, and in a pinch, if you see a recipe that calls for like fresh curry leaves and you can't find them because they're pretty odd, pretty hard to find. Fresh mint leaves will do, dried mint leaves will do in a pinch, but there's really nothing like curry leaves. They're so incredibly like, they add so much body to your dish. And as of now, I only have a few recipes in my repertoire that use curry leaves, but samosas are one of those recipes. That same samosa recipe that had us looking for amchur powder also had us discover curry leaves. So I'm really glad that my husband put his foot down and insisted we follow the recipe to the letter, because curry leaves are awesome. Hey, we're into the D's finally. Dill. So this is dill seed. And I just now realized I do have dried dill weed as well, but I'm not going to get up behind this table to get it. But yeah, dried dill weed, there's not really much place for it. Fresh dill is so much better than dried dill, by the way. That's kind of why I don't bother with dried dill. But dill seed, I got these to make my own homemade pickles. Because it's better to make pickles with dill seed than with the dill leaves. And that's pretty much all I have this for, is for making homemade pickles. Homemade pickles are amazing, they're delicious, you should try them. You can pickle anything, doesn't have to be just cucumbers. You can pickle carrots, radishes, onions, fruit, anything you want to pickle. Fennel seeds. These are good crushed into like naan and other things, and they're also one of the components of our samosas. But other than that, I rarely use these fennel seeds. These are also kind of star anisey. Fennel kind of has that anise. Yep, little tiny bit anisey, but not so much as star anise. Fenugreek seeds. So this is the powder version of fenugreek, and these are the seeds. From now on, I'm only going to get the seeds. I don't have that much use for just the powder. I have been experimenting with this. Like I said about the curry powder, the fenugreek was the spice that was really sticking out to me. And I wanted to just isolate the fenugreek and try it on its own and see what it was like. And I'm really liking it. Like, I've been trying it in many different contexts. I've put it in rice, just fenugreek, chicken broth, and rice. No other spices, well, salt, but no other spices than that. And it adds this really neat, it kind of has a meaty flavor to it. So I think it just kind of enhances any meat that you already have. Or if you put it in vegetarian dishes, it might make them taste a little meaty. Yeah, it kind of smells meaty. I don't really know how else to describe it, but very complex. And yeah, I like it a lot. But it is so much better in whole form, just so much more potent. So like I said, from now on, I'm only going to get the seeds. Fenugreek leaves, or kasuri methi, I think they're called. I got these for a dish, kadai paneer, that I made. It's a tomatoey vegetarian Indian dish with a lot of ginger in it, and then you finish it off with fenugreek leaves. These are kind of hard to describe. They're not like fenugreek seed. They are very herbaceous, and they kind of smell like mossy. It's sort of like moss as well. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like sour, mossy. It's interesting. But yeah, the only recipe that I use these in for now, it's like spinach almost. Anyway, the only recipe I use these in for now is kadai paneer, which I don't make often because my husband doesn't love it. Like, he likes it okay, but he likes so many other things better, so I don't really make it that often. It's not that high on my list either, so I need to find more recipes that use fenugreek leaves so that I can use these. Filet powder. So this is from sassafras, and it is used in a lot of Cajun cuisine. You know, it kind of reminds me of the kasuri methi, of the fenugreek leaves in aroma anyway. But yeah, it's sort of herbaceous, which makes sense because it's like pulverized plant. And it's a natural thickening agent. I pretty much only use this in gumbo and jambalaya. And it doesn't really add much in the way of flavor, especially since like in Cajun cooking there's so many other flavors going on, but it's like a natural thickening agent. Garam masala. So this, it's technically not a spice, it's a spice blend. One of my favorite spices, and if you make Indian food, you need to get garam masala. It kind of reminds me of allspice in that it's a combination of spices that are sort of warming. Not all garam masalas are quite the same, but they generally have all the same ingredients. And cinnamon is in there, I believe. Lots of tasty things. If you make Indian food, you need to use garam masala. You know, you could probably use garam masala in sweet things too. Nah, I think the coriander gets in the way. But yeah, it's such a complex spice. You could get away with like just using garam masala in everything that you cook, and it would taste pretty good. Garlic powder and garlic salt. So these are relics from my husband's bachelor days. This giant thing of garlic powder, look, we barely even used any of it. I rarely use garlic powder. Fresh garlic is so much tastier than dried. But dried garlic powder does have its place. I use it mostly just in spice rubs for barbecued meat. And that's pretty much it. Like I'll sometimes put it in salad dressing, but that's it. Garlic salt, kind of the same story. It's garlic powder mixed with salt. As of now, I pretty much only use this on like steak or burgers, just to kind of season them before I'll grill them. Not grill, saute. I don't have a grill, I live in an apartment. But yeah, that's pretty much all I use this for. So I also sprinkle it on the edge of my stuffed crust pizza. When I make stuffed crust pizza at home, I brush it in butter and then sprinkle garlic salt on it. So those are the only things I use it for. So it's like, it's still 3/4 of the way full, but it's okay, it's still good. Ginger powder. This I pretty much only use in baking. You can, in a pinch, use ground ginger in like savory applications that call for fresh ginger, but fresh ginger is different and better. But yeah, this I'll use in like any kind of molasses-based gingery sort of dessert. I do a pumpkin coffee cake with it. I do gingerbread, obviously, with it, molasses cookies, those sorts of things. Herbes de Provence. So I remember when my husband got this, it was 2016 or 2017 or 2018, but it was like one of those years before we moved in together, before we moved up here. But we were making a recipe from the Bob's Burger book, and it had parsnip fries seasoned with herbes de Provence. So herbes de Provence is this French blend that has lavender, among other things. It's like lavender, thyme, and it probably says on the bottle, or I can just put it next to my face. But anyway, it's a blend. And yeah, the lavender really stands out, because lavender is a potent herb, which we'll get to in a minute. But yeah, this, I mean, you can almost use it interchangeably with Italian seasoning in a way. It's similar flavors. Speaking of which, Italian seasoning. So this is another blend. It usually is like oregano, rosemary, thyme, marjoram. There might be parsley in here too. But yeah, it's a great blend. I used to use strictly oregano only in my Italian cooking. Or I was like snobby about it and like, oh, only people who don't know how to cook use blends. I'm going to use all the spices individually. But I'm like, this is so much easier. These spices always go together anyway, so I might as well get Italian seasoning blend, really easy. I put this in my spaghetti sauce mostly and just about nothing else. Like Italian sausage has this in it and sometimes it needs more, so I'll add extra. But that's about it. Lavender. So this bottle says curry powder on it, and that's because the original bottle that I got this lavender in was too big to fit in my spice rack, so I poured it into this empty curry powder bottle. But anyway, this is culinary lavender. There is a difference between like ornamental lavender. Whew, that is potent. It's old. It's like several years old and it's still so potent. So you mostly probably know lavender is like soap, and if you use too much of it, it definitely can make your food taste soapy. I like this in, you can do it in savory things because it's similar to rosemary actually. So anything that you'd put rosemary in, you could actually kind of put lavender in. But what I liked doing with this for a while, I experimented with it a lot in baking. I would steep some of this, like 4 buds of it with like a half a cup of cream, steep it on very low in the microwave for like 10 minutes, and then I'd cool that down, and then I'd use that cream to make a buttercream frosting for lemon cupcakes, and that combination of lemon and lavender is super, super good together. I've also made lavender ice cream kind of in a similar method. I would steep milk with these lavender blooms, like just a few little tiny blooms, and churn that into an ice cream. That was also pretty good. I didn't like that as much, but one of my friends who loves lavender loved it. So yeah, like, this is pretty cool. It's really, really interesting. And if you're into baking, I would definitely explore lavender. Ooh, and it's also good like with berries, I have found. Like, you can sprinkle little bits in with some berries in a strawberry shortcake, or you can put some in berry jam or a berry pie. Mace. The only thing I use mace in, I think there's like one savory dish that I put it in as well, like some Indian food. But so far, the only thing I ever really use mace in is pound cake. And I got this to make a pound cake like a year or two ago. I was like, oh, it's been forever since I've made pound cake. I used to make pound cake all the time and I love it. I should make pound cake. But like, all these other things I wanted to bake kept pushing pound cake back in the queue. But I have been using this mace. Oh, it's so wonderful. It's quite similar to nutmeg, but it's just, there's just this slight difference. You know what? It kind of smells ever so slightly of black cardamom. Like, similar. It's a little bit similar to black cardamom. It's like black cardamom and nutmeg had a baby. Oh, it's just so neat and distinctive and kind of nutmeggy. And it is pretty much the main flavor component of pound cake. Any recipe that you would put any warming spices like clove or cinnamon or nutmeg, you could put mace in and it would work pretty well. Marjoram. I think my husband had this. I think this is another relic of his. It's one of those spices or herbs that you rarely use on its own. It's very similar to oregano. And this is ground. This is like powdered marjoram. Doesn't really smell like anything. It's probably lost a lot of its potency because it's pretty old. But yeah, it's like I don't really use this in anything, so I should probably put it in spaghetti sauce or something just to use it up. Mint. So this is homegrown mint that I grew myself, and then I dried. Like, I harvested it before it was gonna die, and then I dried the leaves. And it's super potent still. This is part of why I like using these jars. Oh, it smells so good. And it's so much better. Like, I also have a mostly empty bottle of commercial mint that I didn't bother bringing out here. It's just not anywhere near the same. Like, homegrown or home dried mint, you could always buy fresh mint at the store and then dry it yourself. It's like really easy to crumble it like in your fingers into a powder. And like, it's great to finish a lot of Middle Eastern dishes with it. And this is my cat. Do you want some mint, honey? It's similar to catnip. Oh my goodness. Here, play with that. What a good girl. What a good girl. She's been begging for attention, like, while I was setting this thing up and like getting dangerously close to knocking over my tripod and stuff. Okay, you can stay there. Maybe, as long as you're not in the way. Anyway, I like using this mint. If you dry it yourself and it's nice and fresh like this when you dry it, like, and you keep the leaves whole, you can kind of use it interchangeably with fresh mint in dishes that are cooked, at least. You can't use it in place of fresh mint in like dishes where it's raw, like summer rolls or like tabbouleh or something. But if you're gonna cook with it, there's a few Indian dishes I cook that use mint. It works just fine. And then I really like this in tea. Either I brew a bunch of it by itself as tea, or I mix it with black tea to make mint tea with it. Mint black tea. It's really good. But yeah, I think a lot of people think of mint as just like a sweet thing, like mint ice cream or mint chocolate or whatever, but I actually prefer it in savory applications. Mustard seed. This is powdered. This is in whole seed form. You can use this to like make your own homemade mustard, which for some reason I still have not done yet. I need to do that. Very bright, very like sharp, almost radishy sort of flavor. Kind of like, you know, yellow mustard, but it's just that one flavor isolated. A yellow mustard that you buy in a bottle that has like vinegar and all kinds of other stuff in it. This is much more pure. Oh yeah, it's used in some Indian cuisine. Pretty much every spice is used in Indian cuisine. Indian cuisine just uses so many spices. That's partly why I like it so much. But yeah, you can actually kind of like coriander. Any dish that you want to just give a zing to, like a radishy sort of flavor to it, you can just add a little mustard powder and see what happens. But yeah, usually mustard powder I use in like spice rubs for the most part, for barbecued meat, or in some Indian dishes, and that'll usually be the whole mustard seed because it has a better, stronger, more pungent flavor. Nutmeg! So this is like half of a whole nutmeg. I have another whole one in the pantry. I do have some powdered nutmeg as well for when I'm feeling lazy, but fresh grated can't be beat. It's very different from ground nutmeg. Ground nutmeg is still good. Like I still go ahead and I use it in gingerbread and in pumpkin pie and like anything where I'm combining nutmeg with a bunch of other things. But if you're finishing a dish with nutmeg, it has to be fresh grated. And that's often what I do with this one. Like lately, the last couple months, because it's been cold, I've been making my cocoa and then I'll put either marshmallows or whipped cream on top of it and then I'll grate some nutmeg onto it. And oh, that hit of fresh nutmeg as you're drinking your cocoa, it's so good. Onion powder. So this is another spice. I don't use that often because fresh onions are so much better, but the only time in which I would rather use the powder is, dredging. Like if I'm making a flour dredge for mozzarella cheese sticks or for fried chicken or something, then I will also use onion powder, garlic powder, and other things. But yeah, this is pretty much only used for spice rubs for barbecue meat or like flour dredges for things, and I don't really use it for anything else. Oregano. So this is my homegrown, I think this is Greek. Yeah, this is my homegrown Greek oregano. I had Greek and Italian oregano, and I used up the Italian oregano, and I harvested it before it actually didn't die. They survived. I guess Washington is mild enough that they just kind of survived the winter. But I didn't want it to like die or go bad or get frostbitten or whatever, so I harvested it before it started getting super cold, and I dried it, and I've been slowly crumbling up the leaves, just like the fresh dried mint. Like, unlike store-bought dried oregano, you can crumble this between your fingers and it turns into a nice like powder, and it still smells pretty nice. Ideally, I would be storing this in a jar, but I just didn't have any more jars. But I use it pretty quickly. I'll probably finish the rest of this this month. And then this is just Mexican oregano. It tastes a little bit different. Like if you think they're interchangeable, they're actually really not. Kind of like fresh Italian basil and fresh Thai basil, completely different. But yeah, I pretty much only use this in marinades for Mexican food, and then like salsa, when I make salsa verde, I use it, and that's pretty much it. Oh my goodness, we're finally at the last row. Paprikas. So this is just your generic run-of-the-mill paprika. It's made from a ground up red pepper, and it doesn't really taste like much of anything, but it's often used to color food naturally or to give it like just a nice little splash of color as a garnish. Like you'll have it sprinkled on potato salad or deviled eggs or something just to make it look pretty. But like if you add enough of it to a dish, it actually does give it a bit of a pepper flavor, not at all spicy. So here's a hack. If you're making a dish, like if you want to make my enchiladas with homemade red sauce, or if you want to make like a chili or some other dish that uses chili powder, but you're a spice wimp, like you cannot handle spice, just replace it with paprika. You'll kind of get a similar effect, but absolutely no heat. And then here we have smoked paprika and hot Hungarian paprika. So I actually got this to make chicken paprikash, and it was delicious. It reminded me of enchiladas, really. It was just like enchiladas in a slightly different form. But this reminds me of just chili powder. Yeah, it's like chili powder by a different name. But smoked paprika has pretty much one application, and it's for barbecue. As I mentioned earlier, I live in an apartment, so I can't have a barbecue here, and that makes me very sad. So I do wok smoked barbecue indoors, and it actually produces really good results. You get a wok and you put wood chips on it, and then you put your meat on a rack above it, and then you tent the whole thing in foil, and you smoke it like on your stovetop for a half hour or so before you oven roast it. And if you do that, and if in your spice blend you add smoked paprika, your meat tastes like it's been smoked. Like it tastes like it has been barbecued and smoked for several hours, even though it hasn't. So that's pretty much exclusively what this smoked paprika is for. Like if you're a vegetarian and you miss bacon, for example, you could add this. Like it kind of adds that smoked bacony flavor to things. It's basically like liquid smoke in spice form. Parsley. This is a relic from my husband's bachelor days. I would never buy dried parsley. It kind of has no purpose as far as I'm concerned, although I have been very slowly using this up. I'll put it in spaghetti sauces, and like I'll crumble it into flour dredges for fried chicken and cheese sticks and stuff like that. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, dried parsley, just meh. Fresh is so much better. Black pepper. So this is the pre-ground stuff, which kinda, yeah, it does not have anywhere near as much flavor as whole fresh ground black pepper, but I'm lazy, so I do have some pre-ground black pepper for when I'm lazy. And then I've got some whole black pepper as well. Black pepper is, besides green cardamom, my husband's favorite spice, and it's one of those spices that I want to like have a lot of different varieties of it, like pink peppercorn and green peppercorn and all different Szechuan peppercorn and all the different like black peppers as well. This is just your generic run-of-the-mill black pepper. But yeah, this is a very underrated spice. It's always just like, and just throw some salt and pepper on it, like arbitrarily as an afterthought. But like, no, pepper is amazing. It has this nice, like resiny, like it almost tastes like a tree, which that made it sound really, really appetizing. But yeah, it's really good and very underrated. Ooh, and a little known application of black pepper. You can put it in some sweet dishes. It goes super well with strawberries. White pepper. So this kind of tastes like black pepper. It basically tastes like black pepper, except it's white. So if you want to be fancy, especially in like French cooking, if you want to add the pepper flavor to a dish that you're making that's white, like mac and cheese or something, but you don't want those black flecks of pepper in there, use white pepper. Red pepper flakes. So this was another one of my very early spices that I became acquainted with in my early cooking days. It's very cheap. So if you want to add heat and or some kind of interesting flavor to your cooking and you don't want to spend a lot of money, red pepper flakes are great. Also, like if you have roommates who get pizza, like sneak away those red pepper flake packs that usually get thrown away because you can totally use those in cooking. Yeah, they're just a great all-purpose like heat spice that is not too hot. I usually use these in Italian cooking, but I also toss them into a lot of like Asian cooking if I just want to add some heat, some generic chili heat. Rose petals. So you can probably not see these very well because they're all curled up in a plastic bag. But yeah, you can eat roses, and not all roses, don't just like go outside and start eating roses, but yeah, you can eat roses, and these are little tiny rose buds. They look like potpourri, but they're not. Ah, that still smells so good. But yeah, these still have like the little green bud bits, so I have to discard those when I use it. But I use roses in a similar way that I use lavender, pretty much in any kind of baking or sweet application. I'll steep these in milk or cream and I turn them into buttercreams. I've made one of my favorite things to do with rose is to make rose ice cream. Maybe I'll make that this summer and make a video of that if you guys want to see it. It's really special. Just like lavender, you don't want to go overboard with rose. I also have rose water, by the way. It's just not exactly a spice, I guess, if it's water. But yeah, rose is a great flavor to get acquainted with. You'll find it in a lot of Middle Eastern cuisines, some Indian dessert. And just like lavender, it goes super well with berries and other fruits as well. So yeah, like you could make an apple pie and sprinkle like a little bit of dried rose petal in there, and it would give it this really interesting note that most people can't place. What it actually kind of does when you combine it with fruit is it makes it taste like it has honey in it, even though it doesn't. So it's pretty cool. Sage. I don't use this very often. It goes super well with poultry, and it goes really well like in sausage or in stuffing. And that's pretty much what I use sage in, is like Thanksgiving. I use a lot of sage, but and I also put it in my chili. But other than that, I don't really do very much with sage. It's kind of an old school like Americana herb. I don't dislike it. It's very strong and very musky. Whew. But yeah, very good with poultry. So if you like poultry or if you like stuffing, sausage, sage. Salt. Might seem weird including salt in spices, but salt is probably the most important spice of them all. Without it, your food would taste not very much like anything at all. So this is just your generic table salt with iodide added. And then this is kosher salt. It's a flakier salt. Again, if I were rich, salt is one of those things where I'd probably have like 10 different varieties. And I've had like black volcanic salt and pink Himalayan salt and all those other special finishing salts that, you know, you splurge on if you have extra money. But, you know, honestly, kosher salt is pretty good, pretty all-purpose as far as finishing salts go. Yeah, it's a coarser salt, so it's really good to season your meat with it, especially steak. It'll help sort of start tenderizing your meat before you cook it. And it has a nice crunch. Sumac. I have not used this yet, confession. I've never used sumac. I've eaten it though. I've just been really curious to try it, to try cooking with it, because sumac is very lemony. It's very like zingy, and it's a great way of adding like a bright lemony flavor to something without adding wetness or acid that you would add if you used lemon juice. And it also has this beautiful, brilliant red color. So if you've ever gone out to eat Middle Eastern food or anything and there's like this red stuff sprinkled at the top, you might think that's paprika, because in like Western cuisine, that would be paprika, but it's probably sumac. And yeah, I can't wait to try this. I want to put it on roasted chicken. I think that would be really good. Thyme. The main purpose of this herb is to make a lot of bad puns. But otherwise, it's kind of similar to sage in that it goes really well with poultry. I think it's a little more versatile than sage, and I prefer it over sage. It's a really nice, I like, it goes really well in pan sauces, like if I make a steak and then I butter baste it, it's really nice to have a sprig of fresh thyme in there, which I also have some fresh thyme growing outside, but dried thyme is also good for stews and soups, like long simmering applications, beef stew, lamb stew, but it's also quite good with chicken. It adds a nice earthy herbaceousness to whatever you're cooking. Turmeric. All right, this is another spice. You do not want to wear white or any clothes that you care about when you're cooking with this. This actually is often used to dye mustard, like yellow mustard. By itself, it doesn't have too strong a spice. It's pretty bright. Yeah, it's pretty bright and zingy. Kind of reminds me of fenugreek, actually, a little bit. In aroma, at least, not in flavor. But yeah, it's kind of like a bright, zingy flavor to it. And it does sorta remind me of mustard a little bit as well. But usually I blend this with a lot of other spices in Indian cuisine. I rarely use it on its own. The only time I use it on its own is when I make turmeric butter rice. I basically just make rice the way you'd normally make it, except I add a pat of butter and like a half teaspoon of turmeric to it, and it turns it this beautiful bright yellowy orange, and it also adds a nice little back note of flavor. And it's like a huge health craze right now too, but fresh turmeric usually. I imagine you probably are going to get a lot of the same health benefits from dried turmeric as well, and it's going to be a lot cheaper than fresh turmeric. But yeah, like ginger root, it's like this root thing that is dried and then powdered. So that's why I don't get it whole. I just get the powder version. Last but not least, vanilla bean. Some people might not count this as a spice. I figured it's a spice. It's spice adjacent. And if we do count it as a spice, it might be my favorite spice, at least when it comes to sweet things. Add this to everything. This is like the onion of sweet spices. Just add this to everything and it improves it. And vanilla beans are so expensive and so special. Well, this one was actually cheap. This container had 2 vanilla beans, and I think it was like $5-6 at Winco. Like, Winco's the absolute best place to get vanilla beans. If you can buy them in bulk, yeah, except I rarely see these in bulk. Vanilla's very, very expensive. And vanilla beans are so special that I do that thing where I save it. I don't want to waste it. I want to save it for a special occasion. And then I end up just not using it at all, and then it dries out and goes bad. Not this one, though. I think I'm going to turn this one into a vanilla custard. So those were all of my spices. If you're still here, to the 5 of you that are still watching, thank you for sticking around and touring my spices and geeking out over them. Like I said, I mean, if I had more time, money, and space, I probably would have at least twice as many spices as I showed you all. I'm excited to learn more about more spices. I'm sure there's plenty of other spices that are out there that you all know of that I didn't have. And this video is already long enough as it is, so I think I'm just gonna end it here. Bye!